You know, some ideas are just so powerful, they echo through millennia. They shape how we think about justice, about power, and really what it even means to be human. Today, we're diving into one of those huge ideas, natural law theory. And it all starts with a question that sounds simple, but is anything but. I mean, seriously, think about it. What makes a law a real, legitimate law? It seems obvious, right? The government passes it, they write it down, and bam, it's a law. But what if that law is just cruel? What if it's fundamentally wrong? Does just being official make it right? That question right there is what this is all about. And for literally 2,500 years, from ancient philosophers to modern day lawyers, a single evolving idea has wrestled with this exact problem. It's a theory that argues there's a higher standard, a moral benchmark that all our human laws have to meet. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll look at why this ancient idea is still so important. Then, we'll jump in our time machine and see where it all began, trace how it got a major religious update in the Middle Ages, explore its dramatic fall and comeback, and finally, we'll land on a really practical test for what makes a legal system truly just. Okay, so you might be thinking, why should I care about some 2,500-year-old Thoery? Well, because the questions it asks are hiding in plain sight, in the news headlines we read every day and in the basic rights we often take for granted. Look, this theory forces us to ask the biggest, toughest questions there are. How do we know if a legal system is even legitimate? What are we supposed to do when we're faced with a law or an entire government that's completely unjust? These are not just questions for a philosophy class. The answers form the very foundation of modern human rights. They're the bedrock of international criminal law, the system that holds leaders accountable for horrible crimes. So yeah, this stuff has some serious real-world teeth. To find the source of this powerful idea, we've got to travel way back to where Western philosophy itself was born, ancient Greece and Rome. And wow, what a legacy. This idea didn't just pop up overnight. It's got this incredible intellectual family tree, right? It starts with the great Plato, his student Aristotle adds to it, and then later the amazing Roman speaker Cicero adapts it for a whole new empire. To really get this, you have to picture ancient Greece. It's not one country. It's this patchwork of city-states, and they're all rivals. Each one has its own laws, its own customs, its own gods. And in the middle of all that chaos, these thinkers started asking a totally radical question. Is there maybe a single, universal way that all humans should act? They thought the answer was yes, and you wouldn't find it in local rules, but in something every human shares, the power of reason. It was Cicero who really nailed this down for the Roman world. He talked about something he called true law. Now, this wasn't a law that people made up. For him, it was like this divine cosmic intelligence that's perfectly in tune with nature itself. It's everywhere, it never changes, and this is the key part, it existed before any government was ever created or any law was ever written down. Our laws are only legitimate if they're a reflection of this higher, true law. Okay, now let's hit the fast forward button. We're jumping nearly 1,500 years into the future, to the 13th century. This is where the theory gets its most famous and influential makeover, all thanks to a brilliant theologian named Thomas Aquinas. He takes that classic Greek and Roman idea of a higher reason and masterfully weaves it into a Christian worldview. Aquinas came up with this really brilliant four-level system. Think of it like a cosmic legal pyramid. At the very top, you have eternal law. That's God's master plan for everything. Below that is divine law, which is basically the parts of the plan God revealed to us in the scriptures. Then you get to natural law, and this is the cool part. It's our unique ability as thinking people to figure out and take part in God's eternal plan. And then way down at the bottom is human law, the day-to-day rules we create, which are only legit if they line up with everything above them. So, how do you know if one of our laws is any good? Well, Aquinas basically gives us a checklist. A just law has to be for the good of everyone, not just the people in charge. The ruler who makes it can't go beyond their authority. It has to share burdens, like taxes, fairly. And here is the absolute, non-negotiable deal breaker. It can never, ever contradict divine law. If it does, Aquinas says, you obey God, not the law. For hundreds of years, natural law was the way people thought about law. It just dominated everything. But then, with the Enlightenment and the rise of science, it started to fall out of fashion. People wanted laws based on cold, hard facts, not some unprovable divine plan. And then, a global disaster happened that forced everyone to rethink everything. Critics, like the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, were, not fans.
He famously called the whole idea of natural rights nonsense on stilts. For him, a law was just a command from a ruler, and that's it. To him, natural law was just a messy jumble of personal opinions and guesswork. And this new view, called legal positivism, pretty much took over.
And then came World War II. After it was over, the world had to face a truly gut-wrenching question. The Nazis passed laws that made genocide legal. These laws went through all the proper government channels, so were they valid laws? Could the people who enforced them just say, hey, I was just following orders, just following the law? All of a sudden, this ancient debate wasn't academic anymore. It was about life, death, and ultimate justice. This led to one of the most famous showdowns in legal philosophy between H.L.A. Hart and Lon Fuller. Hart, the positivist, basically said, look, as long as a law is made using the correct procedure, it's a valid law, even if it's a terribly wicked one. But Fuller, bringing natural law back into the ring, said no way. He argued that a legal system has to have a basic inner morality. A system that is that evil, he said, isn't just a bad legal system. It's not a legal system at all. Now, Fuller didn't just criticize the other side. He actually offered a new, modern, and really practical way to think about natural law. He came up with a kind of test to see if a system of rules actually deserves to be called law. Fuller made his point with his brilliant little parable about a hopeless king named Rex who kept trying to make laws but failed in 8 specific ways. For instance, he'd make rules but keep them secret, or he'd punish people for things they did yesterday that were perfectly legal at the time. Some of his laws were impossible to understand, and others completely contradicted each other. Fuller's point was simple but profound. If you fail at these basic principles of fairness and clarity, you haven't just created a bad system. You failed to make law, period. It's just brute force, and it doesn't deserve anyone's respect. And that brings us right back to where we started, full circle. After this incredible 2,500-year journey, from the cosmic reason of Cicero to the practical morality of Lon Fuller, I'm going to leave that question with you. If a rule is fundamentally and profoundly evil, does stamping the word law on it give it any real authority? It's a question that never, ever gets old, and one that continues to define our search for real justice.